The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NBA Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NBA Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NBA.
The Houston Rockets signed Fred VanVleet to a brand new contract and how it impacts their team building moving forward. Fred VanVleet, brand new contract with the Houston Rockets, 2 years, $50 million, as reported by Shams Charania, with a player option in year 2. We'll break down what that contract means and how it impacts the Rockets' financials going forward in just a moment. We'll also take a look at the relatively quiet, not even relatively quiet, absolutely just no noise during the first round of the NBA draft from the Houston Rockets. There were some reports they might be trying to trade back into the draft. Will we see any movement out of the Rockets in the second round of the draft? Talk about that, as well as a little bit of just general draft reaction, in particular with the Phoenix Suns actually making some decent moves, which is not good for the long-term future of those Suns picks that the Rockets still own. So we'll talk about all of that on today's show. Let's start with the big stuff, though. Fred VanVleet, brand new contract. Houston Rockets decline his team option and renegotiate a 2-year, $50 million deal with a player option in year 2. Look, awesome deal for the Houston Rockets. We've been kicking around what a Fred VanVleet contract would look like for what feels like a couple months now on the show. We've done multiple different episodes talking about, speculating. Would it be, 3 years, $60 million? Would it be 3 years, $100 million? Would it be 3 years, $75 million? We've gone back and forth with all these numbers. 2 years, $50 million is fantastic value for Fred VanVleet, and credit to Rafael Stone and Eli Whitus and the rest of the Rockets front office, and also credit to Fred, because at the end of the day, Fred wants to be here in Houston. The Rockets want Fred VanVleet as their continued point guard, at least for now, until Reed Shepherd is ready to take the reins somewhere down the line. He is very much the heart and soul of this Rockets team. He's the emotional leader of this Rockets team, and with them trying to compete at the highest level right now, it's important to be able to keep all these pieces in place. Fred's been a gigantic part of the Rockets' turnaround. He's an extension of Ime Udoka on the floor. This was a no-brainer. This was always going to be the outcome, unless there was some wild out there crazy scenario where a trade somehow presented itself where they absolutely needed to use Fred VanVleet's $45 million salary. This was going to be the outcome of Fred VanVleet's contract situation, a brand new deal that's incredibly team friendly. And people might be wondering, why did Fred VanVleet give back so much money, right? He's taking a $20 million pay cut on this new deal. I think the better way to look at it is the fact that the Rockets vastly overpaid for Fred's services when he originally came here. They had to pay the quote-unquote loser tax to steal Fred VanVleet away from the Toronto Raptors. So they overpaid for 2 years. That third year was never going to get picked up, right? The third year being tacked on, the $44.9 million, that was basically a way for Fred and his agent to parade around and be like, we got a 3-year max, right? It is what it is. But if you take the 2 years that he did earn on the overpaid contract, and then these next 2 years where he will be making $25 million a year, and if you average it out across all 4 years, shout out to my guy Yossi Goslin who broke it down, the math. If you average it out across all 4 years, he'll be making $33.4 million annually across the lifespan of these 2 contracts across all 4 years. And $33.4 million is about the value that you'd expect for Fred VanVleet. Maybe a little more than what you'd be comfortable paying him on a flat out regular contract. Again, I think $30 million is about that sweet spot for a guy of Fred's stature, and not stature, NBA stature, not height stature. but a guy, that brings to the table what Fred does as a leader, as a playmaker, as a secondary or tertiary scorer on some nights, the mentorship that he provides to the young guys, all that stuff, right? Fred's about a $25 to $30 million player, give or take, plus the defense, right? You can't ignore that side of the basketball either. So for the Rockets and Fred VanVleet to be able to come to this type of an agreement where his salary drops tremendously going into this next season, it adds a lot of flexibility for the Houston Rockets moving forward. It gives them a lot of flexibility beneath both of the aprons, the first and the second apron. It'll mean that they should, on paper, be able to have access to their full non-taxpayer MLE worth $14.1 million. Now, they might not use all of that because, as we talked about in our kind of cap breakdown episode just before this one, it might behoove the Rockets to avoid the luxury tax this upcoming season, if at all possible, before entering the luxury tax in subsequent seasons due to the penalties of the repeater tax, of being in the luxury tax multiple consecutive years in a row, and how that kind of factors and how that ultimately can really restrict you a little bit further down the line with other different payroll considerations and complications and all that stuff. So, and the other significant benefit here, with it only being a 2-year deal instead of committing to a 3 or a 4-year deal with Fred VanVleet, even just flat out assuming like it's a 2-year deal and like he'll be here for 2 years. Now, that's not even a fully guaranteed option because that second year is a player option on his contract, and there is going to be a lot of money flying around next offseason. It is being called a robust market. There are a lot of cap analysts who are looking at next summer as a summer where players are going to get flat out paid. And so for Fred, it might be an opportunity for him to look at declining that player option, leveraging another team against the Rockets, and basically saying, look, I could go to XYZ location. I can go to Washington and go lead their young guys there, whatever. They're willing to pay me this bag. I need you to match it or I'm going to leave. That might be the case. So it might only mean 1 more year of Fred VanVleet, but the length of that contract, be it just 1 year if he decides to bounce next summer for more money, or 2 years if he decides to pick up the player option because nobody out there wants to actually pay him $25 million, the shorter shelf life of that contract is ultimately better for the Rockets from a flexibility standpoint, especially when you consider that they have Reed Sheppard waiting in the wings, right? The Rockets are so internally high on Reed Sheppard. They truly believe that he is their point guard of the future and that the backcourt of Reed Sheppard and Amin Thompson is going to pair beautifully at some point down the line. It's just a matter of when, not if, at least if you talk to anybody within the organization. And so given Fred only having a 2-year deal, that means it gives you a little bit more optionality as far as potentially moving on to Reed Sheppard sooner rather than later, rather than having him kind of gated and being stuck behind Fred VanVleet in the depth chart for the foreseeable future. So really exciting stuff here. Absolutely fantastic deal for the Rockets. Great deal for Fred VanVleet. Shows that both sides are focused on the ultimate goal, which is winning at the highest level. Fred's sacrificing a little bit of money to give the Rockets that salary cap flexibility, which we'll talk a little bit more about here in just a second. And man, when you look at what the Rockets have done this offseason so far, between the Steven Adams, new contract, the team-friendly extension, Ime Udoka's extension, trading for Kevin Durant, now Fred VanVleet's new contract, and we haven't even hit free agency yet. The Rockets' brain trust of Rafael Stone, general manager, Eli Whitus, assistant GM, and Patrick Fertitta, as well as everybody else involved in the front office, they've absolutely been flat out killing it this offseason. This is what a good front office and a good, executive staff looks like at the end of the day. And just a ton of credit to all three of those guys in particular. That's kind of the Rockets' brain trust. They're the guys behind so many of the Rockets' big, important decisions. And really, ever since Tillman Fertitta went hands off, like after the Russell Westbrook trade debacle, like things have been running pretty smoothly for the Houston Rockets. So credit where credit is due. And I will say, I don't necessarily think they're done yet. I think that they know that there's still a couple stop gaps, a couple holes maybe in the roster that need to be filled, maybe still adding some shooting, looking to add somebody with that MLE this offseason, and or possibly facilitating a trade, maybe expanding on the initial framework of the Kevin Durant deal to loop in a third team, and you could factor in, trading away Jock Landale and Aaron Holiday's contracts to be able to bring in another impact player potentially. The Rockets have a lot of options there. So I'm sure that they're currently exploring all of them. And only time will tell whether or not the Rockets are able to pull something off either with the KD trade or just flat out signing somebody in free agency. But we'll have to cover for all that stuff a little bit further down the line.
Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
How will the Nets' bold draft strategy impact the team's future?
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast.
Brian, we are still dealing with the fallout from what was a crazy draft night in Brooklyn last night. The Nets obviously setting a record, taking 5 players in the first round. No other team had ever done that before. So let's start there. We, knew about the volume of picks that the Nets had, and it had been floated leading up to the draft, like in the hours right before, that they might be comfortable making all these picks. How surprised are you that they actually made 5 first-round picks? Because when they had 4, it was a lot of people thought they were going to have to consolidate, trade up. Then they got another one and still made all the picks. So how surprising was that to you?
Oh, I was stunned. I mean, I'll just full disclosure. I just thought they were lying. There's no other way for me to put it. I thought it was a smokescreen. And I even said, listen, if I was a smart GM and I had picks and I was looking to move, whether that was move up or, punt one in the next year or consolidate or whatever, I probably would say, oh, I'm very comfortable making all of these picks. And then I would casually mention how great my development staff is and how we're so my coach can't wait to get his hands on all 5 young guys. That's what I would be saying. So that's what I thought they were doing. I thought they were just simply protecting the value of those picks before they moved one or more of them. But I was wrong.
And
clearly wrong.
And, I think the fact that they did stick in make all the picks, there's 2 things. I do know that they were at least inquiring about trading up further into the top 10. They had spoken with Philadelphia. I know they spoke with Charlotte, as numerous other teams did. Those teams, obviously the price was too high for them. And then when you look at potentially moving into the late lottery was something people had been talking about. And you look at a team like that made the biggest move.
I want to give you credit too, because I didn't know about Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
I knew San Antonio, I knew Philadelphia, and then I think you reported Charlotte.
Yeah, numerous teams were talking to Charlotte. Yes, heard that. Yeah, they were a team that was seriously considering moving back, and I thought maybe they were waiting to see whether Philly stood there and took VJ Edgecombe, because they were said to have interest in Edgecombe. Charlotte was, and the Philly took him, but they seemed very comfortable taking Knipple. Nets fans' favorite guys, who they would have been so upset with at 8, ends up going 4. So, what does that say? But talking about them potentially moving up into the late lottery, the team that made the biggest move, New Orleans, went from 23 to 10, and they paid a steep price. They gave up their 2026 first-round pick unprotected, which a move that's getting somewhat killed. Like, I think a lot of people rightfully think that was kind of a crazy move. But that just shows what the price might have been to move up. And clearly, the Nets might have thought that was too exorbitant, based on where they had guys ranked on their boards and how the draft was playing out. So that was one part of it. The next part of it that I want to get into with more detail is making all 5 of these picks seems to be part of a strategy that the Nets were, going with, of potential just high volume, multiple dart throws, giving themselves the highest chance to come away with maybe multiple, rotation guys out of this class. And I think that was also exemplified in the fact that they took 3 point guards, all who have pretty similar traits. They do some things differently, but in Yegor Dem, Nolan Traore, and Ben Saraf, all, pass first guys, very talented, very unselfish, all struggle shooting from 3, but have some upside if certain things can hit. So it seems like they're playing the volume game overall, and then also with really wanting to get a high-level lead ball handler and targeting guys with similar traits who they thought could hit. So how do you feel overall about that strategy? Because I think a lot of draft people were scratching their heads seeing them take 3 international point guards. But there is, obviously some logic to it in the sense that they're trying to maximize their chances at, that archetype of player, them coming away with one who hits.
Yes. Well, what I would say is this. General managers, like, people in the dating pool, have types, right? I mean, Masai Ujiri likes these long-armed, athletic, borderline anthropomorphic, like octopi. Like, that's what he goes for, right? Sean Marks has generally gone for, high character Boy Scout guys. I personally, I have said I think they need more dogs in the locker room, and I've said this for years, but whatever. I think now he is added to that type, maybe after watching the NBA Finals, but I mean, clearly going for high feel, high BBIQ passers, guys that can move the ball and are not ball stoppers. It's interesting, and I don't generally do hypotheticals. I'm curious if they had managed to be able to move up to get, not that I ever thought they had a chance for it, but if they'd gotten a Dylan Harper, I wonder whether you would be taking dart throws at 3 or 4 point guards. I don't know. But clearly they are leaning into trying to find as many chances to have a high-end, homegrown lead passer, right? That's clearly what they're after. We'll see how many of these come good. We may have to wait years to figure that out. But I mean, I think the plan, you can say what you want about it for better or worse, but the plan is pretty clear, crystal clear.
And Sean, as you noted throughout his tenure, high character guys always seem to be something that he places a heavy premium on. And then also, likes a lot of finesse players, guys who do certain things. And I think obviously Yegor Demin checks a lot of those boxes, especially from, a personality standpoint. I spoke with him at the Combine. We spoke with him yesterday, and everything I heard from people throughout the pre-draft process was that he crushed his interviews and that he's a great kid and is very team first and all that stuff. And then from the Encore perspective, he is a little bit more of a finesse guy. Like, he's an incredible passer. He isn't exactly somebody who goes into people's chests, when he's driving to the basket. There might be some stereotypes about him as like the European classic stereotypes, which I think are, kind of getting dispelled now that more Euro players are, becoming so prevalent in the NBA. But when he made that pick, and from what you had heard about Demon throughout the pre-draft process, so, everything that I just touched on, was there a part of you who was like, here we go again, we're doing this again?
When he made the pick or leading into it?
When he made the pick.
Well, I think when he made the pick, my brain probably went blank for a second because I probably was in shock. I mean, I expected them to take him, but I thought they would either be taking him at 19 or be trading up from 19 to take him. I did not expect them to be taking him 8th. But yes, absolutely, there was smoke about them really liking him, being enamored with what they saw, during the pre-draft process, and I guess buying into that the shooting improvement was real. Now, maybe some people don't believe it was real because they have a whole lot of evidence prior to this that he can't shoot. But the Nets clearly bought into the small sample size Whether that's recency bias or whether they know better, we'll find out.
And I've heard just from some other people talking about the fallout from this pick and, reaching out to me and saying, the Nets are getting killed and talking to people. There were other teams who really liked Yegor, not so far after the Nets. So people were talking about, could they get him at 19? Like that was a projection in a lot of different places. Doesn't seem like he was getting to 19. It doesn't seem like I think it was probably unlikely that he was getting out of the lottery based on things that I had heard. And then I've heard since. And then going, based on the theme of what we're talking about with these ball handlers, the three guys they got, Demon, Traore, Saraf, we said all high feel, all pass first guys, all guys who play a certain way. And Sean Mark said some things about that in his post-draft press conference that I think will be interesting when you're trying to evaluate how the Nets want to play moving forward with Jordi Fernandez.
Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, fast to pay out, and makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. Whether I'm placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right in the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. And if new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started.
A superstar fell right into our lap. The Wizards took Tre Johnson at number 6 overall.
You are Locked On Wizards, your daily Washington Wizards podcast.
Over the moon that a guy with such high offensive upside, somebody that is going to stretch the floor for this Wizards team for years to come. Tre Johnson is a Washington Wizard.
Man, this is a W draft just off of that. Going to this draft, it was either Ace Bailey or Tre Johnson. The fact that you land Tre Johnson when he was considered to be at some point drafted by Philly mocked, or at most he wasn't going to get past Utah. But the ability to land a guy with his talent, 3-level scorer, a mix of, I always say, of Cam Thomas and a peak Bradley Beal. What he did in the SEC last year was just phenomenal, carrying that Texas team, all of the pressure that was on him, the shooting splits. You put all that together, you really have a playmaker, a shot creator, a guy at 6'6" who has that frame to be a decent defender. And again, I'm not taking a shot at Jeremiah Fears, but that was just the one thing of being 6'1", 6'2". It just was one thing that I was concerned about if we had take Fears at 6, but that wasn't the situation. You get Tre Johnson at 6, even when you didn't have the most luck out of that lottery. W pick by Will Dawkins at pick 6.
One thing that sticks out to me is how the Wizards handled this draft process, leading them to getting Tre Johnson in the draft. One thing that Johnson cited when he spoke to the media in New York pre-draft was that he really enjoyed his visit with the Wizards because it felt like a college environment. It felt like a college visit for him where he got to come into the building, meet everyone within the organization, players, coaches, front office staff. They had food put out for him. He said it really just felt like an environment that was inclusive in a place that he wanted to be. And you could see it on his face. Did you see my man cheesing when he was taken by the Wizards? Yeah, you're getting picked in the NBA, and it's a dream come true for anyone to be a first-round draft choice in the NBA. But his smile told me more to the picture that he is excited to be in our nation's capital and be part of an upswing and become the next superstar here in DC. Another thing that sticks out to me from this process, per report from our guy Chase Hughes at Monumental Sports Network, Tre Johnson said that Wizards general manager Will Dawkins showed him clips of him taking plays off during his visit to DC. And Johnson said that stuck with him. It motivated him to be great. It motivated him to realize what kind of effort is going to be expected of him in a Wizards uniform, because a lot of people have cited that defensive tendencies are something they're unsure about with a prospect like Tre Johnson. He's got the size to be a good defender. Can they get the effort from it? And with all that being said, I think they will. I think Brian Keefe, Will Dawkins, I think everybody in place in the building has what it takes to mold Tre Johnson into an incredible two-way player. I'm just amazed at what he was able to do in the SEC last year, to average 20 points per game and will that Texas team to the NCAA tournament and a stacked SEC conference, shoot nearly 40% from beyond the arc. This is a dude that is going to score the ball so well at the next level. You pair him alongside Bub Carrington, who we expect to have a much larger role this year. See him improve as a playmaker, distribute even more. And with all the pieces that Washington has coming together, we're going to get even more into Will Riley, who was taken with the Wizards' 23rd pick in this draft. The Wizards traded back from 18 to get to 21. Or rather, that's 21, excuse me, not 23. I have to update that. But
it was a long live stream.
Yeah, that's a long live stream. But Will Riley at the 21st pick, the Wizards get him, and we'll have to break down what his role will look like with Washington. But Tre Johnson, man, I am just so over the moon about what he is going to mean to this Wizards franchise and how this guy fell to us. I didn't even think there was a possibility that there'd be a world where Ace Bailey or Tre Johnson would be available for the Wizards 3 weeks ago. But here we are. Tre Johnson is a Wizard.
It's truly a dream come true here in Washington. You get a guy who can be that potential superstar here in Washington that you just really haven't had here in so long. A guy that can put the city on his shoulders when the lights are the brightest, who can show up. And I think Tre Johnson can be the guy. And he showed it at Texas, playing, like you mentioned, in toughest conference in the SEC. And on top of that, he's learning under CJ McCollum. If he's not traded, and presumably he's going to stay here in Washington for at least up until the trade deadline. You learn from a guy who a similar skill set, I guess you could say, when it comes to scoring ability. CJ can score at all three phases. So I love this pick from Will Dawkins. Tre Johnson is just a guy who I just didn't think would be there. I thought he was a lock at top 5, but the board fell, and it does suck missing on Ace Bailey. But maybe, who knows, down the line, that concerns of him being the guy that wants to take all these shots. Maybe that could have been maybe Washington could have dodged a bullet. I know it's easy to say this now because we didn't draft him, but maybe that could have altered the development of these young guys here in Washington. But you get a guy in Tre Johnson who, like you mentioned, wants to learn from his mistakes and is hungry. And you just love to see it. This regime being able to land a guy like him it's going to be remarkable. We're going to look back upon this a couple of years saying, how the heck was Tre Johnson not a top 3 pick?
I think you're exactly right. I think all the tools are there for him as an offensive player, especially at the next level. One thing that I love so much about our guy, Tre Johnson, is his big shot-making ability. Time and time again, in February or March, down the stretch, whenever it was at Texas, he was making big shots in big moments. And that's something that Washington desperately will need in a future where they are competing to win meaningful basketball games. I know that's not going to be the case necessarily next year, but you're going to develop Johnson to be a guy that comes through for you in the clutch. You need a guy that wants the ball in his hands in those big moments, and Johnson fits the mold perfectly for what the Wizards are able to do with them. Unfortunately, here in night number 1, the Wizards weren't able to find an elite big man that we might see pair alongside, work in the screen and roll with a guy like Tre Johnson or Bub Carrington, and also just play alongside Alex Sarr. But Wizards will actually have the 43rd pick in tomorrow's draft that comes over in the trade that was executed with Utah. And that'll be interesting to note tomorrow if the Wizards do go after a big. But back on Tre Johnson, well, we still have the time to chat about our new guard here in DC and what he means. I just loved how he was throughout this entire process, and how much he cited how much he wanted to be in DC, because I think that's such an important part. You had him, Ace Bailey, other guys involved in this process, even Will Riley, who said that his workout with the Wizards was one of the most competitive ones he had gone throughout the whole pre-draft process. It shows that the front office is doing things right now. They are handling things the way they should when it comes to the pre-draft process. And look, the front office hit on all 3 of its first-round draft picks last year. And we need to keep that in mind when we talk about the draft this year. I have full confidence that Tre Johnson and Will Riley are going to be very successful players going forward for this Wizards franchise. And now also amassing some even more draft capital. The Wizards now have 17 second-round picks through 2032, which is just unbelievable.
Yeah, that is a lot of second-round picks. And we talked about it earlier during the live stream where you could potentially – you see a lot of teams use second-round picks, about 4 or 5, to acquire that superstar. So down the line, when the Wizards are eventually contending and trying to make a playoff push and they need to make that move that can put them over the edge and compete in the Eastern Conference, you use those second-round picks. And Will Dawkins, again, being able to acquire a guy in Will Riley, and maybe they thought that, hey, he's still going to be there at 21, so we might as well add a second-round pick. And I love it. Still being able to add Tre Johnson at 6 just makes his draft so freaking sweet because, again, Ben, I just didn't think he would be there at 6. I didn't think he was going to pass Utah, but the draft gods helped us, and he fell and Will Dog on his lap. And as a Wizards fan, how can you not be optimistic right now?
Tre Johnson, our guy, is coming home. He is a Washington Wizard.